Hi, welcome back to part 3 of a two-part series on setting up an airsoft DMR using the double Bell Mk12 Mod1 as the base gun. Now, if you haven't seen the first video, I went over the overview of the gun itself, kind of a review of the stock parts, and then trying to get the hop up and spring tuned for an event. Video 2 was after the event where the gun completely broke, did not shoot at all, and some of the stuff involved in trying to get that fixed and working. This time I can tell you about actually getting it fixed and working. Mostly, there's going to be a part 4 coming. So, at the end of the last video, I had replaced the barrel, the hop-up chamber, the hop-up nub, the hop-up bucking, all of the cylinder, the gears, shims obviously. I think I went through 7 different springs trying to get something for the FPS right. and I also installed the Gate Titan Basic. So I'm running out of original parts in this gun to replace. And it wasn't firing. Well, I took it apart, kind of see what was going wrong, and figure I'm going to be ordering more parts for whatever broke next. And what I discovered was the piston was actually installed at a 90-degree angle relative to what it should have been. So when it was spinning the motor, instead of the teeth grabbing the teeth from the gear coming up and grabbing the teeth from the piston and pulling it back, it actually was grabbing the side of the piston where there's rails to help it ride on the gearbox. And it went back a little bit, and I now have basically the plastic of the piston got gear-shaped indents in it, quite deep, surprisingly. So I cut that out with a pocket knife and got it moving again. I lost a little bit of weight on the piston from a little bit of plastic removed, but it doesn't seem to have caused a problem. And I also loosened up some of the shimming, because I think it might have been a little too tight in places, and that may have been causing extra resistance as it's trying to pull the spring back. I also tried to replace the muzzle brake with a suppressor. I have not seen any pictures of the actual Mk12s in use without the suppressor attached. The OpSync Model 12 for the early guns for the first 100 or so, and then most of the Mod 1s were the Allen Engineering suppressors. The problem I had with that, as you can see I failed, it still has a suppressor on it, was I cannot get the set screw that holds that muzzle brake on. There's a set screw on the bottom about where my finger is. I tried a bunch of Allen keys, none of them fit it well. I tried this trick of putting super glue and baking powder in there. That actually did absolutely nothing other than get baking powder super glued to things. That was a waste of effort, so don't believe the YouTube videos about that. And then I took a Dremel press to it and tried to drill that out. That didn't work. I actually then tried using a drill and tried to take it out that way. That also didn't work. So I burned through 2 drill bits trying to remove that stupid piece of metal. And I tried using various lubricants as I was working. So I don't know what that screw and muzzle brake are all made out of, but I give up. It's just going to stay the way it is. And it's a little short, but compared to a 20-inch rifle, and doesn't look right without the suppressor, but I give up. It's going to stay that way. What I also discovered is the position of the gears inside the double bell gearbox is a little off, like where the holes for the gears are in the gearbox. And I don't know what other problems this may be causing, but it resulted in the top gear as it spins actually hitting the back of the cylinder. Like the round cylinder there, and the gears are just banging into it as they come up to pull the piston back. And I went back and looked at the stock cylinder, and that's actually got a cutout for the gears in the back. Now, I've never seen a cutout like that on any other airsoft cylinder. I went looking online, I couldn't find anything that's got that cutout. So I think that's something specific for the double bell cylinders, with their gearbox being just designed a little wrong way to make that cut in the stock cylinders. What I, of course, did is used a Dremel and just cut a hole in the cylinder I was using. And it's far enough back, like it's behind the piston O-ring. The piston O-ring never gets far enough back to hit the place where I had to Dremel it. And I just removed a couple millimeters of metal at the bottom so that there's clearance for the gears to move through. And I'm crossing my fingers that the cylinder doesn't rotate on its own, but I don't think it will. I also added, as you can see, that is a different scope. It's a Leupold Rifleman. I've had this scope for close to 20 years. It just wasn't in use, and it's much clearer glass than the Tasco I was playing with. So I just decided to throw that on because it wasn't doing anything otherwise. It's advertised as a 2 to 7. In reality, it's 2.5 to a 6.5 magnification range. But that actually works pretty well shooting targets out to about 200 feet with this thing. Just in my backyard, I can see where the BBs are going. It's a much clearer picture, much clearer optic. I've also, you can see, moved the foregrip forward. I found when I was shooting this thing, especially offhand, I want that extra space to get my hand vertically. I like the extra space when shooting so I can get the hand here vertically, whichever way you want to hold it. I may play with spacing a little more. But I found that was better than trying to have the vertical grip all the way back for shooting offhand. I still want the vertical grip for like a patrol carry and a low ready, just because I found that if I'm holding it like this, and I've got my hand bent that way, obviously you hold it in front of your chest, not in front of the camera, but this twisted my wrist up and caused some carpal tunnel problems, where a vertical grip solves that. So I'm keeping the vertical grip on it, even though I'm not shooting with the vertical grip. So after all that said and done, I got this thing chronoed, went through a bunch of different springs, and what ended up being best FPS limit without going over. All the fields in my area, their DMR limits are 400 FPS with 0.2s, which is the equivalent of 1.8 something joules. And the best spring I had without going over that limit was 1.6 joules. So my regular rifles are shooting about 1.4 and change. I'll overlay the exact number later. The spring I ended up with was a Rocket Airsoft M110, I think, and that was only shooting at 1.6 joules, but if I went up to an M120, it significantly exceeded the limits. That pushed me up closer to 2 joules. I tried several springs from ASG. Now, what I discovered in this process, and I'll drop in data on this, the ASG springs had a much better FPS consistency than the Rocket Airsoft / supposedly OEM by SHS springs were, and significantly lower FPS for the same rating. So at the moment, I've got an ASG M135 spring ordered. Their M125 was like just barely in the DMR range. I think it was like 1.5 joules. I'll annotate it. And I'm hoping that the M135 is going to be closer to the correct numbers. So there will be a part 4, hopefully a very short part 4, because I'll just change out the spring and spray paint it. But it's coming. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. If you haven't already checked out the video on line gear, that's a really good playlist that goes over everything from helmet to boots for gear, tactical gear, mostly for airsoft focus, but yeah, anyways, check that out if you haven't already.